This week in our lesson, we're talking about ethics. And the scope of ethics is a very broad category. And there are other courses at BH Carroll in which you will cover in much detail and in a very thorough way ethics. Next week, we're going to talk about integration as it relates to Christian integration of theology and psychology. There are other courses where you will deal with that in much more detail as well. But this week, as we think about ethics, in order to narrow it down just a little bit for you, I want to just kind of touch on ideas that relate to our topic of theory development. And one of the things that's very important and why you have to take this course is you need to have the underpinnings of the theories from which to work and to understand clients. And one of the things that you will do over time as a counselor is begin to develop for yourself a theoretical orientation. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But this week, as we think about it, I want you to understand the importance of developing a theory is not just something that we have to do because it certainly is an underlying plank of the foundation and a very large part of that foundation of counseling. It is an ethical and professional responsibility that we do that. You can't be a competent, capable, ethical counselor without having some kind of theoretical orientation and underpinning to what you do. So this is not just something that we're doing for the sake of the course, the importance of the content, but there is an ethical side to this and an ethical responsibility. One of the big things that counselors get in trouble for quite often are acts and processes that they use in counseling without knowing much about them and practicing in a way that's outside their scope of competence. Competence, excuse me. That's very important. And so we must think about that and come to kind of hold that as very precious. I always tell people when I'm teaching students in a course that covers ethics and the professional practice of counseling, I would always tell them, if you're ever sued, if you're ever investigated by a licensing board, one of the first questions you will be asked during that investigation is, what is your theoretical orientation and what were you doing? What kinds of interventions or what kind of theoretical processes were you using with your client? They're going to want to know that. And a lot of times that's a very hard question for people to answer. Today, one of the easiest answers to that is, well, I'm an eclectic. We're going to talk about theoretical eclecticism and the models of eclecticism toward the end of this course. But one of the things that people do, I think, sometimes is to use that as a cop-out because they really don't want to define some type of theory for themselves. When in reality, eclecticism as a clinical practice and a theoretical process is very, very complicated and requires a lot of skill and knowledge and capability. And so you really find very few counselors, even very skilled, competent counselors, who I think really understand what it would really truly mean to be able to adequately, professionally, and ethically and competently pull a number of different theories together and use various aspects of that. We'll talk about that more in detail later. One of the other things is also that so often we see people only adhere to whatever happens to be the common theory of the time. We hear so much about best practices. We hear so many things about only using models of counseling that have some kind of empirical research support to them. And I get that. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think we put way too much emphasis on those kinds of things. Do we need to do what we do well? Do we need to do it responsibly? Do we need to kind of stay within the framework of common and accepted kind of theoretical ideas in the profession? Yes, we do. Um, but I think when we only just say, well, everything has to be built around those competencies and theories that are only empirically supported, and fit in that best practices model, I think we miss a lot. And for this course, at least, I want you to understand that many of the courses that we will cover, or many of the theories that we cover in the course, have such a richness to them and an understanding of people. Even Freud, who I don't necessarily agree with or have much appreciation for in terms of some of his ideas, um, I have come to appreciate greatly kind of how he understood the complicated depth of people. And one of the things that I find missing in more of the newer, more accepted, best practice, empirically supported models such as CBT is that they're not very depth oriented. And people are not some kind of little superficial beings that we can, as we talked about with Brown, and just kind of touch and go. This is a person who's bringing their life and their being to us, and all of their darkness and all of their troubles to us. And we need to be able to ethically and professionally handle that well. And that means keeping all of those boundaries that we talk about in ethics. It means not violating some of those standards that are there ethically. It means that how we work with that person, what we do with that person is important. It also means understanding ourselves, because a lot of counselors get into trouble, and some that I've known here, some that have been very close personal friends of mine, some that I have taught and trained that ended up getting into ethical problems and being investigated by our state licensing board here in South Carolina. I always realize when I kind of go back and analyze those things that those counselors weren't paying attention to themselves. They weren't monitoring themselves, and that's one of the most important kind of ethical considerations that we have. That we must be cognizant of ourselves, and that's what I think was a part of Browning's admonition is we need to be sober in our thinking about ourselves and who we are and what we bring to the counseling relationship. Not just going into it that I have some wonderful things that I can give to this person that's going to change and modify their life in such a way that it's going to be great. I hope that happens in counseling, but it's a little bit bigger process than that. And so we have to be very careful. We are our tool. That's one of the things that I always mention to people. The only tool that we have as counselors is ourselves. When we go into that room, we don't have a stethoscope. We don't have an eddy machine as an accountant does. We don't have a syringe that a nurse may have. We don't have hammers and nails like a carpenter or a pipe wrench as a plumber. We don't have those tools. We are our tool. And all we have and all we're ever going to have as counselors is ourselves. We may have some books with some homework assignments. We may have some EMDR little clappers that a client can hold and those kinds of things. But that doesn't work very well without us integrating and putting ourselves into that process. So everything that counselors have to do involves me as the only tool I have, and we have to be very careful with that and be very responsible with that. So as we go through this set of lessons, it is important to understand what we need to do ethically and professionally, how we need to act, how we behave, what we do, and monitoring ourselves. Again, those people that I've seen get in trouble weren't doing that. They weren't paying attention to their own stuff. They weren't kind of thinking about themselves and who they were. A lot of times they were at cross points in their lives, or a place where something was going on in their life that they didn't pay attention to that, and maybe seek their own counseling. Um, it was even mentioned in the response to the dialogues this week, a book by Irvin Yalom that he wrote for counseling students. And one of the things that he strongly encourages that all of us who go into this field um, get counseling for ourselves. And I've done that several times. There's been times in my life that where I was struggling, or I just the things in my life were overwhelming, or I could tell there was just some ill kind of things in my life that were unsettling, and um, I sought out counseling, and I think that's very important, and it was very helpful to me to sort through those things and to have that. So I think we need to do that. Um, so this week, as we think about this, I want you to think, obviously about the broad scope of counseling ethics and all the different levels of responsibility that we have, the importance of doing no harm to clients, to do good things, to do beneficial things. That's called beneficence. To be just and have integrity, all of those things that our ethics require, but also to remember as we think about this course in terms of what we do and how we do it as a theory, this is an ethical mandate for us as counselors to know what we're doing, to understand what we're doing, to be competent at it. I even see people who call themselves CBT therapists, or use the primary mode of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And I begin to talk to them about what CBT is and the underpinnings of CBT, and they can't explain it to me. They've gone to a training, and oftentimes they're certified, and they have a beautiful certificate that they have on their wall that they're certified in CBT. But when I really begin to talk to them, what I realize is they've just been taught a bunch of techniques. They've been taught a bunch of interventions to use. So if a person comes in and says, I'm feeling this, I'm experiencing this, then they grab a set of interventions and try to use those with the person to move them forward and address those goals. That's not a bad thing, I guess, but it's not the depth of who people are, and who I think we need to understand they are as well. And we don't get that without truly having a theoretical underpinning that we're going to be working on this semester, but also understand this week as we're discussing it. This is a tremendous ethical, professional competency issue for us as we think about theories and as you go through this week. Hope that helps you. I hope this is a good week. As always, if you have questions, reach out and let me know what's going on.